Good evening. My name is Bren Carlill, and I am the Director of Public Affairs at the Zionist Federation of Australia. It is my great pleasure to introduce this collaboration between the ZFA and Tammi Faraday's Brave Journeys. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I speak, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Knowing that this conversation is being watched in every Australian state, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on which people are watching this. Now, we have all seen the explosion of anti-Semitism across the West in the wake of Hamas's savagery on October the 7th. One person who wouldn't be at all surprised at this surge in anti-Semitism is Eve Barlow, who has been warning anyone who has been willing to listen for years about anti-Semitism in the West and the price Jews are forced to pay when they stand up against this hatred. I had the privilege of hanging out with Eve for a couple of days last year when she visited Melbourne. I was struck by her strength of character, her incredible resilience, but most of all, her intense pride at her Jewishness and her people. Watching her impart this passion to people she spoke with was invigorating, and I've got little doubt you'll experience the same this evening. Speaking to Eve is Tammi Faraday. Tammi is the creator, host, and executive producer of the 5-star rated Apple podcast, Brave Journeys with Tammi Faraday, which is about to launch its 6th season and is in the top 2.5% of most popular podcasts globally. The conversation they're about to have is timely and topical. And so with no further ado, I will hand you over to Tammi.
Thank you, Bren, for that lovely introduction, and welcome, Eve. You know, as I find myself saying to every person I speak to or interview lately, I wish we were meeting under very, very different circumstances. But as the voice of so many Jews around the world, I am absolutely delighted that you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So let's dive right in, my friend. Eve, across your entire career, you've been a tireless advocate for minority groups, a champion of feminism, a champion of diversity. You've cultivated an audience that's skewed to the left, even to the far left. You've done a huge amount in pop culture journalism for increasing the visibility of LGBTQ plus people and their rights. But your Substack handle, and Substack for the uninitiated is an online platform that supports subscription newsletters, is entitled Blacklisted. So I really want you to talk to me about what betrayal feels like, because a hell of a lot of us are feeling very betrayed right about now.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people feel betrayed by me, to be honest. When you recounted my history there, I just thought to myself, well, maybe I hoodwinked them all and I tricked all of these radical leftists and fellow activists into, I got away with it for a number of years, perhaps. And sometimes I feel like that, actually. I feel like I got away with it for a while. I feel like I got off scot-free being a sneaky, you know, the stereotype of the sneaky Jew that kind of is flying below the radar. And I was always one of those Jews who, you know, it wasn't necessarily that there was a but after, you know, I'm a Zionist but, or I'm a Jew but, I love Israel but, you know, I wasn't that overtly apologetic. I think I just kind of skirted around the issue a lot of the time because ultimately I knew it was always a problem. Mm-hmm. So the feeling of betrayal is complicated because I think, well, I can only speak to my own experience. And my own experience is that I kind of always anticipated that there was going to come a day when shit would hit the fan and I would have to kind of accept the way people are. Or, you know, I could tell you so accurately, predicting every single person that I have met in my adult life, in my professional life, in my social life, every single person that would stand on which side of the line. You know, I am not surprised by any of the people who have outed themselves in my life as not empathetic to the cause, or you know, that's on one end of the scale, and then the other end of the scale is vehemently angry with me and my voice and the way I represent myself. I don't find it a surprise to find out who those people are, but you know, we're humanists, right? And we go out into the world I wrote about this in one of my Substacks a few weeks ago. You go out into the world with a good faith approach to people, and you know, if from my experience, I grew up being told quite certainly, Eve, the world is anti-Semitic, everyone hates Jews, and as a kid you don't want to believe that, and you want to believe in the best in people, and you have hopes and dreams just like everyone else, and you want to live a normal life. So you go out in the world with this little like noise in the back of your brain, but you're trying to see the best in people, and you're trying to meet new people and widen your perspective and gain new experiences. And you think over time that the more you show your goodwill and your character and your strengths and the more you share your talents and your heart with people, let's face it, you know, these are intimate bonds. You don't have to be, you know, the romantic partner of someone to have a level of intimacy. You share meals, you share conversations, you share ideas, you share music, you share moments, you have memories of your life with people who turn out to basically not recognize your humanity. And I don't know how to put words to that experience. It's obviously, not only is it heartbreaking on an individual level with people that you wind up having to debate the presence of in your life. Am I going to keep this person? Do I have to draw a line under this? Is it too painful for me to be around them? You know, you're having to make that calculation. But on a much bigger level, the betrayal winds up kind of splitting your reality. Because how can you live in a world where you had assumed that when it comes down to it, we're all in this together, we all have the same ideas, we all have our hearts all work the same way, we all see each other as equal, and then this happens, and suddenly you think to yourself, oh, I'm really not equal to, you know, people really don't see, they see this about the whole spectrum of the world, but maybe this thing that I was told when I was younger, whether you were told it, Tam, or not, that the world is anti-Semitic, maybe there was something to that, you know, and that's a disheartening thought, because you don't want to believe, who wants to grow up believing that the world hates them? Nobody wants to believe that. You know, but where we're at right now, you would probably be wise to adopt some of that mentality so that you can protect yourself. And that's a really sad state of affairs. That's something we need to grieve. That's something we need time for. And unfortunately, with the ferocity of conversation that's happened since October 7th over the past 5 and a bit weeks now, there has been absolutely no time for processing or grief. It's just, we've had to just keep rolling with the punches. And I think that there is going to be a period of reflection after this that's going to be quite tough for people. And I would heed a word of caution. Do not forget how people made you feel in this moment. Truly, don't forget it. And I'm not saying because this is going to happen again. I mean, the likelihood is that it might, but think about what you value in relationships. Think about how you value your own safety, you know, and it's not just physical safety, it's emotional safety. And I would argue that emotional safety is even harder to establish than physical safety.
And I also think that the betrayal that people like yourself and myself and so many others are feeling is very much predicated on this notion, and I've discussed this with other people I've spoken to in the last 5 weeks, is that as civil libertarian types, as people who have humanity at the core of who they are, there's this perception of being a light unto the nations, of loving enough, of giving enough, of being generous enough, and hoping that that is enough to win hearts and minds, because you already know that you're already at a decided disadvantage, right? Not because you want to buy into a victim narrative, but because we have a history of thousands of years of being persecuted. And as you and I spoke about off air, I have tried for so many years to hold a line where, yes, I'm a very proud Jew, but I knew categorically being a journalist and being a Jew was not an easy marriage to make because of perceived bias that people would think that I had necessarily. And as I said, I've just always been under this belief system that if we could just be kind enough, generous enough, good enough, then we would win hearts and minds. But we haven't been able to do that. And it's just been so manifest in the last 6 weeks. And that's why I think that our hearts are broken and and our ability to navigate this, what feels like a new world for people of our generation. But when I see the streets of Melbourne, Australia empty on a Sunday, completely empty in Jewish neighbourhoods for fear of people leaving their homes. I had a friend of mine tell me on Saturday that they had their child beg them to take the mezuzah off the door. We know that we're in a very different landscape now, which leads me to this. Like you, Eve, I've watched as communities of people I've advocated with and for have either said abhorrent things about Jews in the last few weeks or absolutely nothing at all. And despite the voluminous amount of proof, despite the fact that Hamas live streamed their savagery, including parading the bloodied and broken bodies of women in the streets of Gaza, those who saw that footage still had reservations, and not because they were witnessing things that were so grotesque they couldn't actually believe human beings could perpetrate this against others. That wasn't the reason. And not because they were so overcome by the brutality of what innocents endured, but because they simply didn't believe Israel, even when the evidence was proudly provided by the terrorists themselves. That's a whole other level of bigotry. That is systemic, completely blood-curdling, anti-Semitic bias.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you asked me that question following on from talking about how we share, well, we perceive that we share the same hearts and minds as everyone else, and we join in all of these social causes, and we try to give back to our communities, and we recognize in ourselves that we are good contributors to society. We have good morality, good ethics, we integrate well, we help build the world around us, right? And we always have done. And if you look at every single social justice movement, you will see Jews spearheading those movements in history. I actually found yesterday, I was doing research on Amnesty International because, it's one of the biggest perpetrators of anti-Zionist rhetoric nowadays. And I was interested as to how Amnesty started, because I remembered myself that I used to be very passionate about Amnesty International. And I wondered if I just always got it wrong. And I went back and I read the history, and Amnesty International was started by a man in the 70s, I think, called Peter Benenson, who was a British barrister and a Jew, and guess what? A Zionist. He was fully supportive of the state of Israel. And he died in the early 2000s from health complications just before the organization went extremely anti-Zionist. Now, to come back to your question, but also leaning on this, we are in an abusive relationship with the world. Jewish people have always been in an abusive relationship with the world. So while we're putting our best foot forward and we're trying to meet people on an equal plane, they do not see us on an equal plane. We are not the same level of human to them. Even if this is not something that's conscious in them, they don't understand, the maddening attempts at trying to have eye-to-eye conversations with other people on the in the left of center, who consider themselves to be liberally minded, some of which consider themselves to be progressive, to try and get them to understand, you're not listening to me as a Jewish person. Why is that? Why don't you believe our evidence? Hamas, as you pointed out, Tam, went into southern Israel on October 7th and GoPro'd their entire massacre. And by the way, sadly, I can share with you that I witnessed the October 7th footage. I went to the Museum of Tolerance in LA last Wednesday, and I saw it with my own eyes. And it was a decision I made over time, and I wavered back and forth, and I wondered what the purpose of me putting myself through this would be. And I decided in the end that no, it's important to bear witness. I'm not the one that needs convincing, but I wanted, I'm not a very biblical person, but Hamas is our modern day Amalek, and I wanted to stare into the face of Amalek and understand what the enemy is. And I have a deeper understanding now. But you're right, the fact that our neighbors in this world, our peers, our colleagues, the non-Jewish world, will not believe us when they are provided with limitless evidence. You have to come to the conclusion, and it's not a pretty conclusion. It doesn't matter how much evidence we have. The non-Jewish world doesn't believe us because it's not popular to do so. They will always pick the other guy, you know, and some people, and it's very controversial to say, some people say that, you know, the Palestinians benefit from their enemies being Israel. Because and you see this all around the world. Currently, you see terrible situations taking place in other Muslim and Arab parts of the world where hundreds of thousands of people are being murdered. There's not a single march in the street about what's going on in Sudan. There's not a single march in the street about what's going on in the African Congo or what's going on in China with the concentration camps of Muslims there. There's not a single march. Why is that? Well, the Palestinians are the supposed enemy of the Jewish state, Israel, and people feel as though if they remove the element of Jew from the conversation and they're just talking about Israel and they're just criticizing Israel, then what, you know, it's not anti-Semitic. I'm a morally righteous person. I'm on the left of center. I have all of these badges and all of my, you know, my rainbow badges and my, you know, I'm just a unicorn that represents all of these different causes. How could I be a Jew hater? Well, you know, we have to point it out to them. You have an obsessionalism with the only Jewish state in the world. Why is that? Why do you feel like you yourself have to get on the pulpit that you have, where you have no skin on the, and you have no skin in the game, and you have to voice your apparent expertise on this matter, and they're not experts in it? And notably, you know, one of the things that really needs to be pointed out is the silence on October 7th versus a few days later, once the media narrative has turned and the inevitable stories are coming out that, you know, immediately portray Israel as a war criminal, then that's the point of convenience for the social justice world to get up in arms and to get angry and to start posting, because their worldview is now satisfied. It now helps their agenda. And why is that? Because their agenda is anti-Semitic, and they will never admit this. And when you point it out to them, it makes them incredibly angry, because at the end of the day, they know that they want to get away with liking the more popular side, the underdog, the perceived underdog. And there is something about us as Jews that they have never been able to trust. And at the end of the day, they're 2,000 years ahead of us, because they believe in all of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. They believe in the blood libel. They believe in the economic libel. They believe in the conspiracy fantasy about the all-controlling, evil, Jewish, hook-nosed puppet masters. Even if you said that out loud to them and they think, oh, that's totally ridiculous, there is a subconscious bias in their brain when you're talking to them as a Jewish person and you're saying, hey, there's 0.02% of us in the world. Do you know how many of us can actually advocate on behalf of our people, have the facts to hand, can really educate you? All we listen to in time at the moment is educate yourself, educate yourself. Like that has been the buzz phrase of the past however many years of social justice. But when it comes to Jews, we don't count. We're not the same as everyone else, you know? And it is a reality that we have to accept, because because like I say, they are 2,000 years ahead of us. This is something that's not going to change. But I say this to explain it, because sometimes I think so many people are caught in a state of confusion and sheer disappointment, and again, heartbreak, because they've marched side by side with BLM. They've stood at the women's marches. They've stood at the climate change marches. They've done all of the things, and they're heartbroken that in this moment, all of the people they stood with are abandoning them. I can't fix it, but I can explain it, and that's the reason why.
Well, I mean, that leads me to asking you this: what delusions do we as Jewish people need to rid ourselves of? You know, because I cannot assimilate in my mind whether we're talking about an indoctrinated generation of ignorance or if it's something more odious than that. You know, you were very correct in saying just a moment ago, and I'll add to that if I can, you know, Bashar al-Assad murders 500,000 Muslims. The world is quiet. 200,000 Muslims are killed in Yemen, and the streets of London, Paris, and New York are empty. 24,000 Muslims are massacred in Myanmar, crickets. And yet this horrific war that Israel finds itself in, catalyzed only by Hamas's barbaric savagery on the 7th of October, right, seems to have given the world some kind of perverse permission to unleash their bile on Jews absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. When was the first time that you remember a non-Jewish person cornering you and saying, so, Israel-Palestine, let's go? Do you remember that? How old would you have been?
18.
Right. I was slightly younger than that. It first happened to me in high school. But my point is that this is a blood sport for them. Yeah. This is something that they have been foaming, like frothing at the mouth for decades by this point. It's been 75 years. You know, it's crazy. Like earlier, April, May of this year, we were celebrating the 75th birthday of the State of Israel. And, you know, one of the youngest countries in the world, I think maybe the youngest country in the world. And here we find ourselves at this point in time. It's been 75 years young for Israel, but 75 long years of the people who we see at the moment being the biggest advocates for free Palestine, from the river to the sea, all the people that are flooding the streets all over the West and Australia right now, all of those people have been waiting their long 75 years for this moment, for their permission to unleash all of this. And you have people all over the world who insist these are peace marches. These are peace marches. This is just peaceful, free speech, peace marches. We all want peace, ceasefire now, blah, 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 blah. They know that they are not convinced of their argument. They know that they actually don't have expertise in this, because I'm telling you, every single time I engage with one and we start getting into it, either argumentatively or they call me and they start asking questions, they realize they don't quite humble themselves to say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Why? Because it's too much fun. It's too much fun to virtue signal and go out in the street and join and feel like you're doing something good. Well, you're doing something good because, again, you did this march and this year, and you did this march and that year, and now this is the latest march that you're doing. And it feels great. It feels like you're changing the world and you're all chanting the same thing. And I think there's an endorphin elevating experience that they're having. And a lot of it is ignorance. But the issue is that it's driven, there's a willfulness to that ignorance, because the idea that they're attached to is more important to them than sitting down and being educated and listening to a Jewish perspective. They're more attached to the idea. And that's, you know, you talked about the difference between there being an ignorance and something odious, but I would say it's both. There is something incredibly odious to this level of ignorance because it is so widespread, and it is definite. And there are fewer than 16 million of us in the world, 16 million Jews in the world. We're by far and away one of the smallest minorities globally. And we are but a blip in the atmosphere in comparison with the amount of Muslims that are alive and throughout the world, but especially the Western world, who claim to be, again, the underdog in this situation. You know, for example, where I live, the Palestinian Americans, especially the ones in Congress, like Rashida Tlaib, who purport that they represent the Palestinian voice, but they don't even represent the Palestinian voice. The voice of people in Gaza is rarely represented by anyone. This is all just an excuse. This is all just an excuse to attack Israel, undermine Israel, delegitimize Israel, and leave the Jewish people stateless again, because the world wants us stateless. The world doesn't want us to have this power. And as much as the world promised us never again, it was a lie. It was a lie, and it didn't work. They promised us never again. We have a state now, and the world is disgusted that we have a state, and they want to take it away from us because they don't want never again. They actually want Jews to be vulnerable. They want us to be victimized, and they also want to continue recognizing that Jews are never victims so that they can get away with it. And that is the truth. And that is incredibly odious, you know. I mean, that I think that's probably a light description for what that is.
Well, as you know, as David Baddiel said, we're either considered to be a privileged group, incredibly privileged, or we're considered to be rats. I mean, and we're on both sides of that spectrum in the estimation of many people in the world. I'm not saying every person. I spoke to a beautiful non-Jewish person today who I thanked and lauded and venerated for his incredible support of my work, support of Jewish people, praying, saying he's not a person who believes in a God, but if he did believe in a God, he'd be praying for the Jewish people right about now. That's incredibly comforting. And I am very vocal about saying thank you, as you have been, to those people who have stood shoulder to shoulder with us. But they are very few. But they are very few and far between.
And they always have been. Yeah.
Always have been. None of this is new to you. Your name mightn't be Nostradamus, but you've been screaming about this and the pernicious rise of anti-Semitism for an incredibly long time. What I want to know from you, because you really are an expert in this, why has nobody listened until now? And what were you seeing that so many of us weren't prepared to?
When you say why is nobody listening till now, are you talking about Jewish people?
I'm talking about Jewish people.
Yeah. I think Jewish people don't want to believe it. We have lived in an anomaly period in history, and that is the truth, and that is what people need to start accepting. This past 50, 60-year period, and by the way, it's not global, like it's very exclusive to North America, Britain, certain parts of Europe, Australia. But, you know, it's certainly not true of the Middle East and North Africa and you know, Russia and other areas. That I'm talking purely about the West. We've lived through an anomaly period of history that some people call the Golden Medina or the post-Holocaust glow, which I really don't like, wherein the world kind of went a little bit soft on us, just a little bit, just a tiny little bit soft on us, but more because of their own shame.
Yeah.
Their own shame about what happened during the Holocaust made it impolite to continue to be regularly anti-Semitic, right? So for a wee while,
I got to stop you there, because the word impolite is an absolutely beautiful way of expressing this. That's what it is.
Right. It is.
It's not about values. It's not about beliefs. It's not necessarily about, you know, feeling morally disgusted by virulent anti-Semitism or any other bigotry for that matter. It's about feeling that it's impolite. Beautifully
impolite. It was impolite because 6 million of us were gassed and burned alive and shot at point blank. And they decided for a little while, okay, feeling a little bit bad about that. It's, you know, let's just kind of like soften this a little bit. And it just took everything much further underground. And for me personally, I mean, I talked about this as a speaking engagement the other day. Every Jew has, you know, the epigenetics tell us that every single Jew has an internalized generational trauma, right? All of us do. We are survivors. Every single Jew alive is a survivor. We have survived for thousands of years, and we carry our ancestry in our blood. We do. And we are all indigenous to the Levant because we all in our history emancipated ourselves from Egypt. That is part of our story, and it's in our blood. So we have this intergenerational trauma. And for me, I think of it as this like little pilot light that is inside me. And we understand patterns and tropes. And we know we all have an internal experience, an internal feeling when something's a little bit rotten, or it doesn't feel quite right, or it might not remind us of something empirical that we've experienced ourselves. But I think there is something in there from generations before where you just know when it's off. And for years and years, I felt this all my whole life growing up. I knew the kids in high school who were anti-Semitic. I knew the cadence of the tone of the Inquisition in the pub at university with the, so which side you want, Israel, Palestine, like go defend Israel to me now, and a non-Jew, I knew that wasn't an intellectual debate. I knew it was a blood sport. I knew it was something else. And I would say to Jews now, I know that they're waking up now because the wolves are at the door, and they're scratching on the door, and sometimes, unfortunately, they're coming in. Last Sunday here in LA, a man from Westlake was bludgeoned over the head with a megaphone by a Free Palestine protester, and
who was
died.
Who was a college professor. Let's not forget that too.
His name was Paul Kessler, and he died. The wolves aren't just at the door; they're inside. They're inside the house.
I'm talking. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to correct you. I was just so astonished to hear that the person who bludgeoned this 69-year-old Jewish man himself was a college professor.
Yeah.
The perpetrator.
Yeah.
This is high academia we're talking about, which is a cesspool at the moment, which we're going to get into. But sorry, please continue.
No. So, the wolves are inside now, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes a few Jews being offed for people to realize how close to home it is. And because these demonstrations have been happening all over the world, people are, all the pilot lights are going off now, and it doesn't take that. I think a lot of people have probably lied to themselves over the years and felt like their intuitions were hysterical. I mean, all of us who spoke out, we were told that, and we were made examples of, so that other Jews would also say to us, and many did, by the way, oh, you're just being hysterical, because they also didn't want to believe that this period of time that we've just lived through, this 70-odd year period of time, was an anomaly. They didn't want to believe that. But what we have to accept as a community, what we must accept, is that what is happening now is the norm. This is how a society has been towards Jews generation after generation, millennia after millennia. And what we experienced after the Holocaust was an anomaly, and it's over now. It's over now, and we can't afford to not empower our kids. We can't afford to not have the knowledge about our own story, and we can't afford to be straying too far from our community all the time. We have to accept that this reality is not going to end the day after Hamas. This is the total exposure of what has been lying at the bottom of the lake for decades, that we have been able, some of us have been able to ignore due to a refusal to believe that anything could ever be that bad again. Because again, never again, right? Which I would argue has totally failed.
Well, whether Israel degrades all 30 or 40,000 Hamas operatives, whether it destroys the tunnels and seizes the arsenal of weapons and rockets, will it mean anything at all, apropos to what you just said, if we can't somehow reverse the indoctrination of hate and the false portrayal of Israel as a bloodthirsty, racist, colonialist enterprise that's programmed into the minds of tiny children literally from the day they're born?
I'm going to give you a harsh answer. And it's that there are always hearts and minds that you can change. But the anti-Semitism that we know and that we see, and now that we have evidence of today, is institutionalized across the board. It's in our governments, it's in our education systems, it's in our health systems, it's in the arts and entertainment, it's in media, it's everywhere. It's totally institutionalized. The norm is to be anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. So, let's say best case scenario, Israel totally minimizes civilian casualties, exposes the Gaza Ministry of Health, has been woeful in its reportings of the number dead. And in fact, the number dead is minimal, and most of the people who were killed were Hamas operatives. that Israel has recovered all 240 hostages, and that the day after Hamas, Israel completely rehabilitates and reorganizes all of the Palestinians in Gaza, rehouses them, gives them a government that is democratic, that they can vote for, and starts empowering them with their own economy, and then leaves them to it. Say that happens, and Israel actually frees Palestine, and there's a two-state solution. Even at that, the world will never believe it. And that's, by the way, that is what we intend to do. That is the pipe dream. That is the pipe dream. That's the mission.
Because it doesn't fit the narrative.
No,
it doesn't fit the narrative.
It doesn't, and they will never believe it. Even if the best case scenario happens, and it's just amazing how much effort the IDF is going to, in order to actualize exactly what I just talked about, the process that I just talked about. They are going to enormous lengths to ensure minimal civilian casualties, clearing the hospitals of the infants that Hamas are desperate to keep in the hospitals, clearing the crossing, protecting civilians getting from the north to the south with their own tanks that are camouflaged so that they don't get shot at or stabbed while they're trying to cross through to safety. I saw a video this morning of IDF soldiers on a beach with Gazan civilians, tending to them, giving them food and water and bandages and just calming them down. And they're having totally civil interactions with one another. The IDF is going to utmost extreme levels to enable and to ensure that this is as justified a war as possible and that it's as humanitarian as possible. But it doesn't matter. It matters to us, of course. It matters to our sense of pride. And I think that's where we have to split the reality. It's like, well, you have to ask yourself, why am I supporting Israel? Why am I a proud Jew? Who am I? Versus accepting what the world is outside. We're not here to convince the world that the IDF is the most moral army in the world, because they don't want to accept it. They don't want to believe it. But we're here to understand that ourselves and to know which side, like we're here to understand in ourselves who we are and where we stand. Yeah. And at this time when we are being gaslit and shamed and victim blamed to a level that I have never seen before, ever, in any area of advocacy.
Yeah.
It is imperative for our souls and our own psyche, our own sanity, to know the truth of the situation, to know that we're not the ones being lied to. We know the truth. We know the facts. I find the facts very therapeutic, I would say, almost at the moment. I find that's my therapy, is knowing actually what's going on in the ground and understanding that I don't know. I don't really know how to explain why I find it so comforting.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't understand. I would love you to explain to me. I don't understand how you feel comfort. Yes, in ensuring that the IDF and Israel conducts itself with moral virtue and decency and compassion and humanity. 100%, that makes sense to me. But what doesn't make sense to me is that the global gaslighting is so ubiquitous. So even though you know that Israelis are conducting themselves to the best of their ability, I mean, this is war, and it was catalyzed, and I'm going to keep repeating that because that seems to be a very inconvenient truth for the rest of the world. It was catalyzed by the most brutal attack against Jewish innocence, right? Barbarism. See, you're a very brave person, Eve Barlow. I'm not as brave as you. I couldn't see that footage. I literally couldn't see that footage. I would never have slept again. I'm a mother of children. I don't think I would have ever survived it. I can read it, but my brain would not have allowed me to have been able to watch it. Right?
No,
I've seen plenty, but there were things that I couldn't see. The international community are not reporting this. They're not reporting the fact that women had their breasts sliced off, that they were raped in front of families, that babies were baked in ovens. It's just, you know, the internal rage. I've never felt like this in my entire life. I have let things go. I have been the subject, I'm talking obviously on a micro level, I've been the subject of anti-Semitic slurs when people found out that I was Jewish. I'm accustomed to that, and I have always known how to navigate that to the best of my ability. Someone wants to be vile, if someone wants to be nasty, my philosophy my entire life has been lead with kindness. Just lead with kindness. I'll show you up with my decency. I'll show you up with my morality and hopefully my inherent goodness. Am I perfect?
How is this different?
What were you going to say? What did you say?
How is this any different? How is this different? Because, you know,
this is different because the facts do not matter. That's the difference.
Of course. But what I'm saying is, so sorry, maybe that was misunderstood. What I mean to say is, for instance, today I posted on Instagram that there's an IDF soldier. It's just such a lovely thing to see, who is carrying a pride flag in the middle of the desert in Gaza. And it's the first time a pride flag has ever been flown in Gaza. So what I mean to say to you is, really, in a wider level, we are all just killing the world with kindness right now. Because really what we're doing is that, again, I keep paraphrasing this quote because I don't know it and I need to learn it, but there's a Golda Meir quote where she says something like, you know, rather be alive and have terrible public reputation and have them hate us than be dead, right? So what I'm trying to say is that whether they want to accept us setting an example or not, we are maintaining our light, we're maintaining our goodness, we're being moral people, we're actually doing more for the people of Gaza than anyone marching in the street, by the way, and certainly more than Hamas, who have been subjugating their own people for 17 years since Israel pulled out of Gaza. In fact, all of the things that they did, the atrocities they committed on October 7th, is behavior that they have already exhibited on their own civilians for years. You think they haven't practiced any of that? Of course they have. So, you know, all I mean to say is that, of course, we're angry, we're rageful, we're heartbroken, we feel betrayed, we feel like no one's listening to us, we feel like we're being dehumanized every day, we're being demeaned, we're being silenced, we're being shut out of places, we're in exile again. The Jews are in exile again.
Yeah. However,
we still haven't lost sight of who we are. Our actions speak louder than their words. We're still operating we're still doing things the Jewish way, and we should be proud. And I just think at this time, feel all of the feelings, but do not leave out the feeling of being proud of who we are and of knowing who we are and being able to take comfort in the knowledge that we are behaving exactly as moral, righteous people, the real morally righteous people, to be honest, which is, you know, I think comes back to your point about killing people with kindness. That's they may refuse our example, but we're doing it anyway, you know. So I think they would be worse off without Jews in the world. Just my opinion, but you know,
I'm with you.
Name a society that has succeeded after ridding itself of its Jews. I can't.
Well, I mean, ultimately, the vast majority of Jews want peace. More than the vast majority of Jews want peace and have striven for a peaceful coexistence with their Arab neighbours and a two-state solution. And, you know, I remember being a very young student and feeling positively euphoric and feeling like I literally had a seat at the table of history when I saw Rabin and Arafat shaking hands on the White House lawn. And that optimism and hope, Eve, never died. And it never died despite the intifadas, despite the terrorism on buses, in malls, in cafes. It never vanished. But this feels very, very different.
It does. And
why do you think that?
the instant it happened. The instant it happened, it felt different. A couple of things. One, the level of barbarism. The last ditch attempt from Hamas to make a name for itself. Truly, you know, Qatar cut its funding to Hamas, and this is how Hamas responded. Let's show the world who we are, you know, and they went in there. They were supposed to take the Negev, allegedly, but instead they got totally carried away with themselves. They pumped themselves up with cocaine and amphetamines, and they went hell for leather on a total joyride akin to the Nazis. I actually, having seen the footage, I would make the controversial argument that they were even worse than the Nazis, because they're doing it in the name of their prophet Muhammad. There is a religious element to this, a religious fanaticism to this that has to be acknowledged. We have to acknowledge that. We have to hold the moderate Muslim community to account and demand that they denounce Hamas. We have to, because this is the nature of the hatred. So
Douglas Murray also made that comparison, as you have done, in the sense that he also said this was worse than the Nazis, because he too has seen that footage. And he said the differential here is the glee. Nazis had to drink alcohol at night in order to survive the barbarism that they perpetrated against Jews. And believe me, I don't feel sorry for Nazis. But in order for them to cope with that cognitive dissonance or that moral dissonance of what they were actually perpetrating, they had to get inebriated at night. These people who perpetrated these atrocities were so joyous. And that, to me, is the thing that I can't get around. That is the one thing that I actually cannot compute. I cannot understand that you filmed it. You did it on your GoPros. We have recordings of you telling your parents how proud they should be of you because you murdered 10 Jewish people with your bare hands. And yet people are denying that it happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the fundamental reasons why it's different. Okay. So you have this religious fanaticism that's neighboring Israel, and this, not just what happened on October 7th, but then this follow-up commitment by the leadership of Hamas, sitting cushy in Qatar in their billion-dollar hotel rooms or empires, whatever, saying that they pledge to commit as many October 7th massacres as it takes to wipe the Jews from the earth, right? So this is what makes it different. We are living next to a bona fide genocidal terror regime that needs to be eliminated, and eliminating them is no easy piece of cake, because they have been constructing an entire Gaza Strip underneath what they've been constructing a terrorist HQ, extremely advanced and convoluted beneath the Gaza Strip, and waiting for this moment to provoke Israel and invite this counterattack so that they can drive up the emotional anguish of the world and get as much support for them as possible, because of the way that they have constructed the Gaza Strip, with all of their headquarters, all of their main terrorist bunkers underneath the most populated parts of the Gaza Strip. The hospitals, the schools, the children's schools, where they've now found that there are rocket launchers in classrooms. They're in the classrooms of the schools of these kids. I mean, and you're talking about Israel committing war crimes? It's absolutely backwards, the whole thing. So that's one reason why this is different. And when the massacre happened, I was seeing the footage as it was coming in, and my first thought was, well, that's the end of a two-state solution, because how can you make peace with people who have this kind of genocidal ideology? You know, that's one reason it's different. I think another reason that it's different is the world's response. The world has shown us that the world and all of its organizations, all of the global humanitarian organizations, including the UN, has showed us that it doesn't actually believe that the state of Israel is legitimate. So really, we're on our own. We're on our own now, completely. We do have Biden, we do have America as an ally, but in terms of the UN and everyone else helping to broker peace between Israel and the Arab nations, we're stuck with America, and that's basically it. You know, we don't.
But there's a disconnect between leadership and the population. So
Right.
yes, we have Biden, who has come out in ardent support of Israel and Israel's right to exist. We've got Blinken as well, who's supporting Israel too. But okay, so we've got support at that level. But what about the populace who are marching on the streets in hundreds of thousands, who don't have the literacy about what's ever happened in the Middle East, who have absolutely no knowledge as to the history of the Jewish people and their indigenous connection to the land of Israel? That's just gone. It's not even something that is understood on any single level. So what do you do with that? Okay, we have a current Democratic incumbent who is supportive of Israel at this minute. I don't necessarily know if that sentiment will endure, depending how long this war in Gaza continues. But I would love to know, what do we do with that? Because it looks to me like leaders of the West are absolutely terrified and petrified. And I have said this very loudly. They are very scared at what they have allowed to fester and ferment in their countries, the immigration policies that they've chosen, the people that they've allowed to come into their countries. We've got police in the UK saying we cannot execute our duties because we are intimidated and we are outnumbered. What do we do with this?
Well, it's not our problem. It's not our problem. The situation in the UK is the problem of British people. The protests in America and in Australia, the same. There's a problem of American people, of Australian people. These are these countries' problems. We have our own country. And now is the time to focus our support on Israel, to focus. We are diasporic Jews. I do believe in the diaspora. I think it's important that we have Jewish representation around the world. But as for what happens with the problems that exist and are festering in other societies, that's not our issue to deal with as Jewish people. It's not. I have never felt more like a guest in another country as I do now. We have a country that we will fight for its endurance, which we're doing now with our voices in the diaspora, and that is important. Israel will survive this moment. I don't know if there'll be a two-state solution. I hope so. I hope that the IDF completes its mission. I hope that they go into Gaza and they manage to rehabilitate it. I hope that they can establish a Palestinian state in Gaza for the civilians who are there. I don't know if they'll be able to do it, because at the end of the day, the power exists with the Palestinian people as to whether or not they want to accept what's offered to them, as to whether or not they want to rescind on this idea that they are permanent refugees of the land that Israel now is established in. And if they can rescind that idea, they can rescind that ideology, and they can stop hanging on to it as their modus operandi for generation after generation, and stop holding on to this refugee status, and they can accept a state in Gaza, then we can have a two-state solution. But the important thing for us as Jews in the diaspora or in Israel to understand is that this is not like a dual loyalty thing. We are people of the Levant. Our indigeneity is to Israel. And as far as I'm concerned, my priority is making sure that the state of Israel remains and continues to exist. And so, if Britain becomes unmanageable, if America becomes unmanageable, if Australia becomes unmanageable, we have a place to go. And that's it.
Preliminary data from the ADL Centre on Extremism since the 7th of October reports that anti-Semitic incidents of harassment, vandalism and assaults against Jews has increased by 388% over the same period last year. That's significant. This isn't happening in the Middle East. This is happening in the West. And you and I don't have the time to go through an inexhaustive list of all the atrocities that have taken place in the West in the last 5.5 weeks. What are we facing? If our life is in the diaspora currently, do you think that we have a future in the diaspora? I mean, I don't know if you're buying tickets to Israel anytime soon, but it's certainly something that's been in the minds and hearts of lots of Jews around the world, because we are not feeling safe.
Yeah, people have asked me this question a lot recently. We might have a future in the diaspora. It depends whether or not people can meet us at our table. Are people prepared to step up to our table and accept the reality, accept the facts, accept who we are and how we will be treated in the world, and the fact that we will have equal rights to everyone else. You know, to me, it's conditional upon that. And it should be. That's how it should work. That is how we will no longer be in an abusive relationship with the non-Jewish world. We must demand that we are treated the same way, with the same human decency, the same ear, the same desire to understand, you know, the same language as everyone else. And our future in the diaspora is conditional upon that, in my opinion. We should not be in a position again where we are as vulnerable as we're currently experiencing our lives. I know that I speak for almost everyone when I say that the past 5.5 weeks have been sleepless, have been defined by hypervigilance, by constant questioning of visibility, whether that's Magen David's, whether that's Mezuzot on doors, constant questions about whether or not to send our kids to school, constant questions about whether or not to show up for Shabbat services at synagogue, to engage in high holy days, to go to the kosher deli to buy meat. You know, this should not be our reality. This cannot. How can we have a sustainable future in the diaspora if this is how it's going to be? It's not sustainable. This is not sustainable.
You've also said that this is a war on two fronts, which it really is. It's the real-time war in the Middle East and it's the war in the media. What role does social media play in this contagion-like spread of anti-Semitism?
Major. It's playing a major role in the mind washing of entire generations of people, depending on which application they're using. I decided a long time ago that I was never going to be a TikToker, which is not a decision I regret, but it is my awareness that TikTok has single-handedly managed to create anti-Zionists out of the entire Gen Z world. This is I've said this a few times recently, but if you look, you have to follow the money. And, you know, China are the proprietors of TikTok. I think that if there was a way to infiltrate Western minds without even having to attack the West, social media is an ingenious way of doing that. It's an ingenious way of creating civil unrest and creating a dialogue, a distress, a constant sense of anxiety and nervousness and need to control a world that seems to be spinning on its axis all the time, or spinning off its axis rather. Whether it's TikTok or Twitter or Meta, all of the social media websites and applications have managed to bombard people in an extremely emotionally overwhelming way, in a way that's actually it's too intimidating for the brain to deal with, where there is constant access to disastrous information and this constant pull, this constant need to use our voices and to advocate and to push back and to rebel and to rise up and be the resistance. I think that's why we live in these times of increased advocacy. It's no coincidence to me that since the mid-2000s, when Meta and Twitter and, later, or Facebook as it was then, and then Twitter and then Instagram and then TikTok appeared, that we've been living in an increasingly more politicized society where protesting has become a way of life, where having a slogan in your window has become a way of life. It never used to be like this. When we were growing up, I was born in 1986, and I remember growing up in the 90s. Yes, people had the odd bumper sticker, or, people were politicized, but it wasn't to the same extent where you're weaponizing an identity. It's part of who you are. And social media has made these causes, social justice causes, and slogans like Free Palestine, it has actually made it part of people's identity. And that's where the danger comes in, because when you're asking people to reconsider or to listen to another perspective, another point of view, they have this tribalist reaction where where they shut down because they feel like they're being personally attacked. You're attacking part of their identity now. They have owned these ideas, and it's been their becoming, imbuing them and taking them on as part of their humanity. So even without any skin in the game, truly, you've got Western Asian kids who think that Free Palestine is part of their identity, and they have absolutely no connection to this issue at all. But they have accepted that, like with all of these other facets of their identity, the Palestinians are the moral equivalent. So, yes, like, you know, this is also part of my resistance. This is part of who I am. So social media has done this to people. It's reduced and minimized complex ideas and equated them all with each other, whether it's Black Lives Matter, feminism, climate change, LGBTQ plus issues, or now a geopolitical complex conflict between one nation and you know, a people of refuge of eternal refugee status. It has aligned all of these things in a bite-sized way that's actually meaningless, and preyed on people's emotional insecurities. And I mean, it's unbelievable. You know, I'm not the first person to make the point. I think the first time I heard it was when Sacha Baron Cohen was making an address at an ADL event to counteract hate speech online, and he said, you know, like, if in their wildest their wildest dreams could you imagine what Goebbels would have done with social media. You know, it's like with everything in life, there are good parts of technology, there is good parts of innovation and advancements that humans create, but there's also a dark side. And without adequate legislation, and legislation has never caught up to social media companies, it's still struggling to do so now. Without adequate legislation, controls, checks and balances, accountability, this is an extremely dangerous tool, and it has been weaponized by the Eastern world. It's been weaponized by Iran, by Russia, and by China. And all of those countries have a common interest in defeating the West. So
how do we awaken the woke?
Is that our job?
Well, again, I sit here thinking the most barbaric, heinous savagery was perpetrated. Let's just break it down to women. We saw women in Gaza with blood in their pants. We know that women's pelvises were broken. Where are the feminists? Where are they?
Yeah, they are on the bandwagon of suddenly feeling as though rape is a justified act of war when there's a resistance happening. They are doing mental gymnastics right now to justify what happened, to either justify what happened to the women on October 7th, or to do what I think is even more criminal of feminists, to suggest that the rapes never happened. I mean, which is fundamentally toxic.
It's diametrically opposed to their entire belief system.
Yes, entirely.
Yes. You wrote about it. It was absolutely beautifully put, how you said, when it came to Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein's assault on how many women? Nobody asked for rape kits. Nobody asked for additional photographic evidence. No. When George Floyd was categorically murdered with a knee on his neck, did anybody ask for toxicology reports or additional bits of evidence or forensic evidence to demonstrate definitively, without any question whatsoever, that this man was killed by a white policeman? No. But there is evidence that's been provided by Hamas, and that is not enough. Yeah. Was it AI? It's Zionist propaganda. I mean, how are these movements ever going to survive? They're absolute treachery.
I'm saying that I'm saying this in an empowering way. Do I hold on to my words. I don't know. I don't know if I'm just saying it because I feel like I need to. But for me personally, and I think for Jews, we all have to take this line. Any person who claims to be a feminist, who denies what happened on October 7th, can never be taken seriously again. Never. Their work is stained for the rest of their lives. If you cannot point blank see rape as rape, you are not a feminist. You are not someone who defends women. You could just as easily be caught out questioning the credibility of a sexual assault survivor in another situation. How do we know that you wouldn't? If it is the case that your advocacy is more self-motivated and more reliant on how it benefits you and your self-interest, then you're untrustworthy and you lack credibility as a feminist. End of story. And I certainly have chucked a hell of a lot of books out from feminists that I thought were on my side in the past couple of weeks. Well, I haven't chucked them out. I put them in recycling. They're in the recycling bin, but
thank you for that, Eve. No, I appreciate it.
For me, I will never trust a single feminist in any space, in human rights law, in literature, in any LGBTQ space, in the arts. I never want to listen to an artist, an LGBTQ feminist, whatever artist ever again speaking to women's issues who ignored and obfuscated from October 7th. That is a hard line for me, and it should be for all of us. And there's only 0.02% of us comprising of the population, so I don't know how much of a dent we can make in these people's successes, but I sure as hell hope that there won't be a single Jew in a position of power who gets it, who will lend their platform to any of these people or hire any of these people or use them as an authority ever again. And we should all have that. We should all be aligned on that. This is, it's not cancel culture. It's just, again, doing away with our abusive relationship with the world. Like, stop being abused. Stop letting people walk all over us. I'm not making excuses for them anymore. We have the evidence. Hamas gave it to us, and it's embarrassing for them. It should be embarrassing for them, the amount of evidence that exists.
Yeah. Look, we both know that Hamas could release all the hostages today, lay down their arms, surrender unconditionally, and this would all go away. But they refuse to do so because their raison d'etre at the moment is to generate and invoke and foment as much anti-Semitic sentiment worldwide while they're having their moment in the spotlight. So I have to ask this as we're wrapping up, though I don't want to wrap up because we could speak to you all night. With a broken heart and a resolute spirit, I genuinely ask, where to from here?
Yeah. For me personally, I pray every day that the war will be over as soon as possible. I'm not a fan of war. I don't think any of us are.
No.
I don't want there to be civilian deaths on the Gazan side. Of course I don't. However, I will say this. That's not where our emotions need to be prioritized right now. And anyone who is asking as a preface to having a conversation with you as a Jewish person who is currently grieving and terrified and dealing with this new normal, who asks you to preface whatever you're going to share with, but do you have empathy for the civilians dying in Gaza? That's not a good faith conversation. We're allowed to prioritize our emotions upon our own people right now. Like that's not an abnormal thing. It shouldn't be an inhuman thing. But I will say that I want this war to be over because there is catastrophic destruction happening here, and no one wants that, And I want there to be, as I've said countless times during this conversation, I want and hope for there to be what's the word I'm looking for? A sustainable solution here after all of this destruction and distress and shock. I hope that we can arrive with all of the hard work that's gone into this strategic ground offensive in Gaza, that we can that we can arrive at a sustainable future for a neighboring state that will never again get the power or the means or the ideology to be able to even fathom carrying out another October 7th massacre. So I hope for that as soon as possible. I have understanding that that can take a long time to achieve. It could take years to achieve that. Not the ground offensive, but the rehabilitation of Gaza could take years to achieve. But in the interim, you know, aside from what's going on in Israel, because there's two elements of this. There's the war in Israel, which I actually focus my attention to less as the weeks go on, because I have faith in the IDF. And I think Israel will win this war. It's winning this war right now. I don't worry about that. I do worry about the Jewish community at large and how we're going to embolden ourselves during this moment. And my main goal at the moment is to get in front of as many people in the community as possible, to try and empower the community with knowledge, with reassurance. And the reassurance comes from knowing our story, knowing our identity. And again, like I was saying earlier in the conversation, understanding this hatred and why it's happening, and not being left all the time in this state of kind of flight confusion, of running away from the feelings because why is this happening? You know, there's a lot of that. And I want to try and concentrate on diminishing that feeling of confusion, because every survivor needs to understand what has happened to them in order to process and to have a shot at living a meaningful life and to be able to imagine a better future. And so really what needs to take place right now are conversations between Jewish people, communities coming together and sharing the knowledge in order to build our future, because we have a hell of a future. I believe that we endure every single time. We endure, and we have endured and endured. And yes, there will be losses, and there are always losses, but we're still here. And we're still going to be here. We're not going to go anywhere. And they can be mad about it, and they can march in the street, and they can raise hell, whatever. But we're not going anywhere.
Well, Eve, I want to end tonight by quoting something you wrote in a brilliant piece in 2022 entitled Ghost. I want to remind you of something important. Whether it's in work, your relationships, in your family, whatever context, you may find yourself being punished for speaking out and speaking freely. It's because the truth scares people. And if you're like me, you'll go through every single period of your life, losing investments you made, when you find out that friends or jobs or invitations dry up after you said what needed to be said. Know this, you'll survive. It's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. The best relationships and the right opportunities handle the truth. The ones that can't were never reciprocal. They were never real. They were never honest. Be honest. You won't ever regret it, and you'll always get through another sunset and experience a new dawn. Thank you so much, Eve, for your voice of reason, your leadership, your valor, and for all the personal and professional sacrifice you've endured in championing the rights of the Jewish people.
That's awesome. It was such a pleasure to do this, and thank you for lending your platform to me.
I want to acknowledge the beautiful Tammi Slade for making the introduction to Eve. I'd also like to thank Jeremy Liebler, Dr. Bren Carlil, Mandy Hildebrand, and all the team at ZFA for their support in putting tonight's conversation together. I would also like to acknowledge the incredible Brave Journeys team, including the tireless work of my collaborator and cherished friend, who I met at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem at what feels like an entire lifetime ago, who's been selflessly and masterfully editing all my content over the last 5 weeks, well into the middle of the night. And thank you to all of you for being here. I hope you feel more informed and more empowered in knowing that we will not sit down and that we will not stay silent, and we will continue fighting until all our loved ones come home. Bring them home now. Good night.
Free.